Hello, Complexity Weekend, November 2021 cohort. It is several of your facilitators here in our cohort gather space, and we're going to be talking about what you can expect from attending the pre-weekend event, Intro to Complexity. There are three kinds of pre-weekend events in the November 2021 Complexity Weekend cohort, and each of these kinds of events will familiarize you respectively with the people, the tooling, and the ideas of Complexity Weekend. This short video and the Intro to Complexity session is about the ideas. So check out other videos and elsewhere to learn more about the people one-on-one events and the tooling office hours. So we're actually going to go through the slides that will be used during this interactive discussion Intro to Complexity session, and we're actually going to basically just go through it right now as if we were actually doing the session, which in a way we are. So we just start in this Intro to Complexity session with an introduction. I'm Daniel, and I'm a researcher in California, and I'll pass it around to all the other facilitators.
I can go next. So I'm Sean. I'm a organizer for Complexity Weekend, facilitator, lifelong participant, hopefully. And yeah, I'm just a big fan of complexity. I love reading about it. I love learning about it and all the different forms it takes in different systems. In my day job, I work on data center security, so that's kind of my main embodiment of complexity that I deal with day in and day out, and through organizing. But yeah, that's myself. Michaela, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. I'm a facilitator with Complexity Weekend and a resident in Gather. If you have sleepless nights, I'm usually there. I'm a biomimicry practitioner and also a communication specialist, very interested in all kinds of narratives that we can create for complexity. I think we should get complexity out of the ghetto and make it clear that people use complexity every day without even knowing it. So that's my mission. So Kai, up to you.
Hi all, I'm also a facilitator for the Complexity Weekend, first timer, so need every help I can get. Pleased to be here. Also a biomimetic practitioner, but a budding systems everywhere. I dare not use the word, but that's one of the ways I apply complexity in the real world for circular economy. And apart from that, lifelong journey, because I think it's beyond all of us and we need each and every one of us. Up to you, Jacob.
Hi everyone, I'm a researcher and study collective animal behavior mostly, and so working with big data sets, looking at social insects, also with fish. Currently a project so with termites, honeybees, and guppies, also zebrafish. One of the things interesting to me about complexity is like looking at these different systems and realizing actually there's similarities across these different scales of nature and also of human interaction. So I'm looking forward to this weekend and having more discussions with people.
Thanks. Brings us nicely to our first slide, which is just where are we coming from with complexity? And as we see on this subset of facilitators, and as hopefully you'll see in each and every different pre-weekend event you come to, people are just coming from many backgrounds, many listed and unlisted terms here. So maybe Sean, then anyone else, what else do you want to add here?
Sure. I think one point I kind of want to make, just based on the introductions in this group, is I think a lot of the times when people get into the cohort Keybase team, there's a lot of talk about research and papers, and definitely we want to be grounded in a lot of the complexity research and ideas. But I think that research component can be very vocal in our cohort when there's many different backgrounds like are on this slide. There's people coming from it who've been practicing complexity, as social workers, healthcare workers, designers, like all these different ways of interfacing with complexity that that they're not involved maybe in research at all. Maybe they want to be involved. I just want to make sure nobody thinks that the cohort is any one of these, or they think like, oh, everyone's in research, I'm intimidated, like I don't know if I can engage. I think researchers, last time we looked at the last cohort, I think the stats were under a third or a quarter. It's like it's a very diverse group, and I think you'll experience that when you get into the first cohort, is that this is one of the most diverse groups of people you could really bring together. So just keep that in mind when you're talking about complexity or anything or engaging at all kind of during the weekend or the pre-weekend. Anyone else?
During the session, it's a fun opportunity. We always work on the slides. During the session, people bring up new areas and new places they've seen complexity be applied or not, areas they want to be excited about applying it. So that's something we'll hang out and discuss in the session. We move from kind of our backgrounds and experiences and curiosities from different areas to talk about some of the key terms of complexity. And of course, there's many key terms, there's many languages and many approaches. So here we just wrote down a few starter terms. Anyone can add any other notes. And of course, during these sessions, we update the slides and add new words. We'll have to shrink the font probably. But these are just to give us some shared understanding in common terms that help us communicate across systems.
So would anyone like to share any thoughts or anything that's coming to mind seeing any of these words? Maybe we'll try to get two people to quickly say, just so we can get some multiple perspectives kind of in on a lot of this.
Yeah, I can try. I mean, for me, I resonate with many of the words on this slide, and I think a nice way to start the journey or just is to be curious about some of them, how they relate also, I think, to our individualities. And for me, that would be arts of fractals and self-organization. I guess everybody of us can relate to. So on the way, as a way into subjects and then sort of start branching off and enlarging our understanding. So for me, it was a lot to do with art and fractals and visual, I think, visual cues.
Thanks. It's always a good jumping off point, like how does this term apply in my own life or in this certain system? Because if you just pick a random system out of a hat, the public transportation system or the weather, a lot of these terms are going to apply. And that's sort of the challenge sometimes, but also the excitement of complexity when we are talking about systems and terms that apply to different systems. So, yep, Michaela, go for it.
What I think is interesting is all these words seem connex, but not centralized. And I think that's also the beauty of complex systems, of which Complexity Weekend is an example, is that you can see bridges and different ways of connecting disciplines that sometimes feel very remote from one another. And as Jacob said before, the commonalities are bigger than the divides.
Like you start connecting the words, all of a sudden we have a network. Uh-oh. So that's fun.
Networks.
I want to sneak in with a quick point, which is that a lot of these words, like decentralization, wicked problems, adaptation, evolution, like they're very general concepts. But I think an important thing to realize with complexity is that sometimes it's so generic that it kind of loses meaning. And in order to really ground these very abstract kind of concepts back to reality, it can be helpful to focus on a specific system and unpack these terms into that specific system. So if I say, I'm working with a social system, of this type, or a social economic system, what does decentralization look like in that? Or what do leverage points look like in that system? Just try to unpack these kind of very abstract general terms into specifics in front of you. And that really helps with the applied complexity side of what we're trying to do.
It's a yes and. It's the general patterns and it's very much the particulars and the specifics. So then we continue the discussion with some questions that can last 10 minutes. It can last us months. How do we recognize complexity? And then anyone can just give a thought on one of the questions. How do we model and design complex systems? And how do we have long-lasting positive impact on systems?
Jacob, would you like to share about any of that?
Well, how do we model and design complex systems? Yeah, I guess I do work on some of modeling complex systems. So one way that I use is with agent-based simulations. This is one thing where you have individuals that are all simple and they're all interacting in some way, and you want to see what is the overall outcome. But the key thing is the interactions between the agents.
Cool.
How do you know when you see complexity? Like, how do you recognize complexity? Like, what are some of the telltale signs of, like, oh, I may be dealing with a complex system? What are other types of systems that aren't complex?
Well, maybe a more simpler answer. I usually think of a complex system as one that you can't break down in too much. So the social insects are is easy example, because you can't take one ant and then just put it separate from the colony. It can't function. It won't have the same properties. Won't do the same things. So then it's, the system is complex because it's the interaction among all these parts and the working together, the connectedness between all the ants that's making the colony actually function.
Another way to say that is, like, the interactions produce novel information. So, like, the interactions themselves are necessary to get the total sum of information of the system. And if you break it apart into the component parts again, it's not just the sum of the parts, right? It's more than the sum of the individual parts because of the extra information in the interaction. So, like, that's at least my perspective on it.
And then, yeah, Michaela, go for it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Kai about this. Is a complex system, if we look at the Cynefin model, not just any system that's not simple or complicated? It's the default system.
I would say so, for sure. But I mean, it is, for us, I think it's hard to, we have a way which we are cultured, and we want to we're human mammals, so we want to break down things into something we can master or handle, and we're permanently in a position where we actually disguise our reality, right? So our grasp of reality is very limited. So in absolute terms, do we have cause and effect in most of the situations where we think we see it? I do not think so. So for me, coming back to Cynefin, you have to recognize that it's always some sort of orchestration or a dance, right? You have to oscillate between different modes, I guess, or forms, and understand what you can apply in which context. And I think we're pretty bad with analyzing our various contexts. And then I think and then we come into developing capacities, I guess, or capabilities, is how do I cruise or navigate around that and shift from one phase, in inverted commas, to another, right? We do not like that type of language. I use a lot of metaphors for motion, I guess, but in the end, we have no definite state of being with respect to that. So that's where I find it links into art, for instance, depending on what metaphors we want to use, but it's the day-to-day where we think we can, to a certain degree, apply the cause and effect, and in most situations we can't. So this is sort of where Cynefin, I think, is a very good framework to help us dance. But coming back to your initial question, and what we both share, or many of us here on the call, is biological references to that. I mean, if we look to nature, we can see that nearly everything we want to simplify is much more than what we even can grasp or understand. And I'm going to stop here. Sorry, you gave me such a nice introduction there. So
some key terms there to ask about in the cohort Keybase team, if you're curious. The Cynefin framework, right? That's what went off the top of my head. Dan, do you want to go ahead and close out? This is just a taste. It's just us getting excited about it. Once you start, it's hard. It's hard to stop. It's like a Pringles can. But
Yep. Sure. So just to run through a few things, we'll update this, but on the left side is a graph of our cohort's registration information. On the x-axis, what is your familiarity with learning complexity? And on the y-axis, going up and down, what is your familiarity with applying complexity? So there's a correlation, causation, another question, of course, but we have so much diversity of perspectives and level of familiarity from 0 to 10 on both axes. So there's those of you with little and a lot of familiarity on all different dimensions of complexity, and that's really reflected by this word cloud, which shows that there's a few words and a few themes that people bring up again and again when asked about what kinds of problems they're interested in applying complexity science too. And then there's this tremendous long tail of many unique terms and skills and perspectives that people bring. So it's about both. It's about the commonalities, the big islands, and it's about the constellation of the small terms. And that structure is a little bit mirrored in the question on the registration about what are you looking to contribute to Complexity Weekend Community of Practice. And to the cohort, there's a can-do attitude, and people are looking to contribute their knowledge, their background, their perspective, and then similarly, very long tail of specific domains of expertise and skills. So we'll update this over the course of the pre-weekend, and that's a little bit like a feedback loop between the cohort and itself as we share information about the cohort to the cohort, as well as, of course, meeting each other one-to-one, reaching out on the edges. And then the last piece that we'll put here is just where to next. So what we summarize here is just check out some of our great colleagues and associates information, like Systems Innovation course on complexity, Complexity Explained, the Santa Fe Institute, and then, of course, being here and participating in Complexity Weekend, checking out this playlist, which you're probably watching now, being active in the Keybase team, and then just interacting in the synchronous and asynchronous ways that the cohort provides and beyond. So we can each give a closing thought, and then we hope to see you in one of these Intro to Complexity sessions.
Nice. Kai, would you like to close us out? We'll maybe go around just one each.
Sorry, I forgot to mute. Yeah, I just would like to encourage everyone to engage with it, as many of the sources and the individuals around, because there is no starting point, no ending point. It's a journey, and I think none of us has any of the answers. Only together we have starting points.
Nice. Jacob?
Well, some closing words. Yeah, looking forward to discussing some different perspectives on complexity. Working with one type of a data and experiencing all of, from a biological side. Also, it's really interesting to think of, like, how could this be applied to problems that are around in the world? So, such as social organization and, of course, disease spread and this type of thing.
Thanks, Jacob. Michaela, and then Sean.
Yeah, I think everybody should. I was very impressed at all the big brains running around this space in the beginning. Now I'm more familiar with all of them, and I realize that complexity is for everyone at their own level. If they want to learn, it's endless, and I think we should all have fun while we do it. And this is a great space to have fun.
Nice. I think the final point I'll leave off of is just making sure, we have core values as a community. They're in the participant single source of truth. Just taking a look at those is good. One of those core values is, inclusivity. And, we all have very different perspectives coming to the table. So, when you mention terms, just try to, think like, oh, is this a term that maybe is specific to my field? Maybe I should define it or explain it. So a little earlier, we had a conversation, and some others, Kevin came up, but also complicated systems, simple systems. Those are things that, if you're ever curious, there is no dumb question in complexity, right? Just ask, and facilitators, other participants, someone will help you out. So that's what I say, is just unpack all the terms you use and don't feel afraid to ask at any point about anything. Dan?
Perfect. Thanks, Michaela, Sean, Kai, Jacob. We'll see everybody in the rest of the pre-weekend and in the weekend. Bye.